Hey there everyone, welcome back to Me Monday. Tonight we're going to talk about a wine that I'm trying. I was actually going to try this on Thanksgiving, but Victoria couldn't come down, so I didn't feel like drinking by myself, so I saved it for tonight. We're going to be trying this Barton and Guestier. It's a passport type wine. I don't really know what that means. If you do, please give me a note in the comments. I looked it up and there just wasn't a lot of information about that particular designation, but it's a blend. It's a blend of three different kind of grapes grown in France, and this particular one is grown in the Saint-Tropez region and is a blend of Grenache, Syrah, and Cinsault. So it's 50% Grenache, 30% Cinsault, and 20% Syrah. This company is actually one of the oldest distributors, wineries and distributors in the Bordeaux region, dating back to 1725, where it was founded by the true Irish adventurer Thomas Barton. Now his grandson Hugh partnered with the Frenchman Daniel Guestier in 1802, and from the Châteaunes region of central Bordeaux. Barrels and bottles are loaded up on the Garonne River and sent to many places around the world, but Ireland, England, United States, for name a few. 130 countries it's in. So anyway, this rosé, this blend, is what we're going to try tonight, and hopefully it's going to be better than some of the ones we've tried in the recent weeks. Now I had a kind of difficult time finding information about this wine. The company's website's undergoing maintenance at the moment. Now, one of the things I did like, you went to the website and you just had to click enter to signify that you were old enough, which was easy enough and not troublesome. But they're in the middle of revamping their website, so hardly any information of any quality was there. And other searches around the web for information about their wines came up fairly scanty. So most of the information I have is about the particular grapes they use for the blend and things like that. So let's give it a try, shall we? While we're trying it, we'll talk about some of the different grapes they use for the blend. I do like the way it appears in the bottle. It's very clear, very pale pink. Very nice to look at. Fruity right off the bat. I do like the pale color quite a bit. Very pale, very pretty. It smells kind of spicy. The Grenache part of this comes from a grape that ripens late in the year. So typically likes to be grown in more dry environments like Spain, southern France, Sardinia as well. You get that very lightly fruity wildflower taste. Just a little kind of sour. There's nothing outstanding about it. You know, they try really hard to present themselves as being a fine wine. It may be a fine wine, but it's only okay. It's just sour, almost like a lime or a lemon. I would say more like a lemon. And like you would imagine if somebody boiled up some flowers and you ate the broth. It's just kind of, it's okay. Unfortunately, that's been my luck lately. I just haven't found one that I found particularly outstanding. Again, maybe this is one of those that you have to enjoy with food. The pairings on this was lamb, beef, hard cheeses, and spicy food. And you know what? I could actually see that. If I had something spicy, I think it would go quite well with it. So yeah, I think this is again a food wine. Something. Maybe I should start bringing food to my tastings here in order to get the full. I'll try it again in a minute and see if I come up with anything different. In the meantime, we'll talk about the other grapes that are used. Now, the Cinsault grape actually comes from Algiers, northern Africa, Morocco. Very heat-hardy vines. One of the things you'll find, and when I have a long time to talk about this, because the topic warrants a lot of time, is the terroir, or the environmental factors that work with wine and how it affects how it tastes. That's why year to year many wines, you know, one year may be better than another, but that has to do with maybe the amount of rain they got that year. Environmental factors, and we'll discuss all of those. But so far, the two heat-hardy ones just don't seem as sweet to me. It's tart, and it's yeah. Now the Syrah, not to be confused with the Petit Syrah, is again a dark-skinned grape that is actually imported from historically from the Shiraz region, or the city in Iran. Again, a warm climate wine. So what we have here are blends of three warm, hardy wines, and I can guarantee you the effect of the environment on them affects their flavors. And so I guess the important thing is to take the particular wines and blend them in such a way to make them complement each other. And I'm not 100% sure they were successful with this one. We're going to give it one more try and see what we think. Yeah, it's okay. That's it. One of these days I'm going to find something that's going to knock my socks off, and I'm going to be so happy to share that with you. In the meantime, we got just okay wines. Alright, and now for our next segment on this Me Monday. You may notice, first of all, I'm not wearing the same clothes that I was wearing before. Well, it's been over a week since I recorded that other segment, and to be honest, between the fact that I had a really pretty bad case of the flu over the last 4 days and my procrastination over this next part, I believe it's delayed me in getting this out. But I think my procrastination was mainly over exactly how to handle the information I'm about to give you about my grandfather. And basically I'm trying to make it not about the interrelationships between myself and him and our family, because you know, personally, because his passing had such a profound impact on my life, which I will talk about at some point, and the fact he was so beloved within our family. You know, if I were to spend too much time dealing with the personal aspect of it, I would probably never be able to get through the video. So we're going to talk about just the facts, and you know, a lot of information about the you know, his family, siblings, and things like that, and extracting ourselves from this particular portion of it. I think it's the best way to handle it, but it took me a little while to figure out exactly how I wanted to present this, and this is kind of what it came down to. So, all right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my grandfather, Lovell Flavius Brooks. I will be calling him by the name Papa, That's how we knew him. I don't know, addressing him as Lovell is just not, or to you as Lovell is not how it's not natural for me. So, this is about me presenting it, and it's the most natural way to do it, so I'll be calling him Papa. Now, Papa was born on March 16th in 1915. So, in the middle of World War I, he was born. He grew up through the 20s and was a young man during the worst times in rural Alabama during the Depression. I do know, as we talked about, Oscar was an alcoholic, and I don't know how well he was able to support the family. He had eight children. So Papa only had 1 year of high school and dropped out, and apparently went to work. I don't know specifically what, but I do know, based on the information I have from his military records, his enlistment record in particular, that he was an experienced meat cutter before he ever joined the Army. Growing up in rural Geneva, don't know a lot about him, but I do know he married my grandmother, who her maiden name was Ruth Bowles. And my father was born when Papa was 22 years old, and Grandmommy, who was Ruth, was 21. So they were a fairly young couple when Dad was born. Again, in 1937, height of the Depression, you had to have some kind of skill, in order to make some kind of a living. I know hustling and things like that. I know in rural Alabama, what they tended to do was sharecropping, and I don't know if that's necessarily in terms of, the proper definition of that, but what my dad always referred to Papa as a gentleman farmer. But in the context of this, he basically owned a few strips in somebody's field where he would go out and plant his vegetables, potatoes, cucumbers, whatever they were planting, so that they had their vegetables throughout the seasons. And so he had a part of a plot of land, whether he rented or whatever, or the way they did a lot of business back then was what they called trading. I'm sure it was bartering. One of the things I'm going to read later was from a third party that I found online, which is a wonderful story about my grandfather's store, which I will also talk about later as well, so we won't get too far into that. Shortly after, of course, 1937, you have the rise of the Third Reich in Germany. Our country is going to war. With all this fervor, my grandfather enlisted in the Army on the 7th of January 1944, which is about 6 months before D-Day. Now, I know he was over in England for a while training. I do know, because of the job he did in the Army, of course, he was not, trained frontline assault troops. So he was not with the first few waves going into Normandy, but he wasn't there much later on than that. Now, he enlisted in the Army as a private, and his enlistment time was until the end of the war plus 6 months, or until as long as the government wanted him. In his enlistment record, it shows what his civilian occupation was, and his showed that he was a skilled meat cutter, but not in a packing or meat house like that. It was just a skilled by hand meat cutter. And that's what led him to his job that he did in the military. He was a cook. But cook, you were also a soldier. And so you're out with your men, you're out with your troops, you're out performing your soldierly duties as well. One of the stories Dad always talks about Papa is about the nightmare. There was a time where he was pinned down, him and his company were pinned down by German snipers, and all night long, and they were hiding underneath the bodies of their fellow soldiers, and waiting until, you know, the shooting stopped until they went to sleep. When they went to sleep, they went up there and they killed him. Papa killed the guy. And Dad says he has nightmares. He had nightmares about that the rest of his life, and it wasn't about the act or the war. It was about, and you have to remember who my grandfather's forefathers were. Now, I don't know how religious Oscar was. Papa was extremely religious. His grandfather, James Washington, was a Baptist minister. His great-grandfather, Middleton, was a Baptist preacher. So he was a very religious man. His nightmares were about going before the Almighty and being judged for his actions. And after killing that man, knowing he broke one of the 10 Commandments, he was deathly afraid of what was going to happen. So that was what he had his nightmares about. Now, I have searched high and low for records of Papa's military service. Unfortunately, on July 12th of 1973, there was a huge fire at a military personnel center in St. Louis that destroyed 12 to 13 million historical records of military people, and I believe Papa's records were in there because they can't be found. When I had done research before on this, they responded with the fact that there was no records to be had. So we have to assume that Papa's records were destroyed there. So we don't know exactly, step by step how things went for him, but we do know, and this is from my dad as well, that Papa was in Patton's Third Army. He saw a lot of France. He helped drive up into Bastogne to relieve the 101st Airborne up there when they were surrounded by the Germans in the Battle of the Bulge, and to push them back, and was there until the end of the war, and pushing into Germany. I don't know if he actually went into Germany. He never mentioned that. He talked about walking across France and things like that. So yeah, he is definitely part of our great generation that experienced the Depression and the war, and then came out of it and survived. And more than survived, he actually thrived. Now, while Papa was overseas in France, to the editor of the paper. So we have his own words while he was over there, which we're very, very grateful for. And I'm going to read the letter to you now. So it starts with the headline, Lovell Brooks writes from France. Just the other day we received a mighty nice letter from our old friend and meat cutter, Lovell Brooks. He's not cutting meat these days, but is making Uncle Sam a good soldier over on the other side of the pond. Needless to say, we appreciate his letter and enjoyed reading it, and know that you will feel the same when you read it. So the date line says, in France, March 29th, 1945. Dear editor, first let me congratulate your daughter as a pinch hitter in the lowdown while you were suffering with that broken shoulder. I'm not really sure what that means. Who knows, she might be able to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers this year. She did a good job, and I'm sure the rest of the boys will agree. I really enjoy that column as well as the rest of the Reaper. That's what the Geneva local paper is, so apparently he's been getting copies of the Reaper, which I'm not sure is a publication I would necessarily want to receive if I were at war, I suppose, but it was, they were from an agricultural based community, so there you go. I haven't written the Reaper before. Maybe I was a bit bashful. But anyway, 3 other soldiers and myself were talking tonight, and of course, about home and after the war, and it went like this. The average person has no conception of war in the sense that the average GI knows it. And it is very hard for him to be at all adequate in his sympathies, for he cannot conceive the deprivations entailed. He knows men are killed, but they are a small percentage. There are 12 million under arms. He knows men are wounded, but he sees very few cases, and then only nearly cured ones. The newspapers help little, for they are concerned with large movements, and makes a slow and costly advance appear a rout in the local papers. Some of the new documentary films help, but even they tend to brush over the more painful aspect of battle. It is a strong contradiction that war, which demands the obliteration of individuality, can only be understood properly in terms of the individual,
and the personal pain and discomfort it causes. It means nothing to say the Third Army advanced under strong opposition, but the collected diaries of each GI in that army would explain what that movement meant. Even the parents have no real understanding of what the boys endure, nor the wives or sisters. They know only of the danger, and that they often magnify absurdly. And so, as the plight of the civilian is serious, he wants to feel sympathetic, but he just doesn't know how. The irony of it all is that the soldiers riding home will conceal the truth of his misery and homesickness, the suffering and death he sees, for he does not want his mother and wife or sisters to know of it yet. He wants the civilian in general to appreciate what he is enduring. It is an impossible situation, cannot even be solved until the civilian and the soldier suffer alike, as they did in Britain and Russia. What we can hope for is that civilians will try to understand the veteran and help him face his problems. I believe the people in my hometown will, for they are tops. Don't you think? Or does it make sense? I know they are tops, and the whole thing makes sense to me. That's a quote from Horace. I'm not sure who Horace is. How is the meat situation? Tough, brother, tough. Another quote of Horace. Wish I was there to help you and the others solve it. If my luck holds out, that's what I'm looking forward to. Best regards to all, Lovell Brooks. So, a word directly from Papa from France. You know, in rural Alabama, he came back, and not sure how he came up with the money, whether it was VA loan, whatever, but he bought a small country store. You know, the typical mom and pop, you know, and this store was basically a small convenience store with a butcher shop in the back, and he would be back there carving meat. He had a meat cooler and everything. I mean, it was highfalutin. Coca-Cola machine up front, and you know, a little bit of everything. And that store was renowned in the city. I call it the city, Geneva. His main competitors, if you're talking shopping center, was the Piggly Wiggly, and it was small too. So Papa's store, though, had the charm of being somebody they knew, you know, and the folks would go up there and they would trade, whether it was money or bartering or whatever. The thing is, though, Papa had a very small house. There's a picture of the house. Now, this house, I only have pictures of it after it was had a brick facade put on it. But this house used to be a white, you know, wooden shingled outside, and inside it's 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, a dining room, a kitchen, and a very small TV room, and then a little back porch. A pretty decent amount of property there. But if you notice the driveway here, behind that used to be a big garage, and my cousins and I would always climb on top of it. We'd hang out on the roof up there, just because it was something different. It was a cool place to hang out. But yeah, it was a small house, easily affordable for a small family, you know. Not really sure how they grew up there with my dad and his sister. Now, this is one other thing. This is the first generation of my family where they didn't have more than 8 kids. I'm just wondering if Papa, growing up, seeing his father struggle and suffer with all the children, trying to support them, if he didn't, you know, make an extra effort to not have more kids than he could financially handle. And so he had my father and my Aunt Pat, and again, in a 2-bedroom house. I'm not sure where they both stayed, if they grew up and slept in the same room or whatever. As an addendum, I've been considering about the small house that they all lived in, and was talking about the 2-bedroom. I believe there was an addition that was built off the kitchen, and I'm going from a memory that seems to place a bed in that addition. So maybe the addition was multi-purposed as another bedroom for Aunt Pat when she got older. I'm not sure. Maybe Keisha or somebody who watches this can fill us in. I'd be interested to know, just to fill in a piece of the puzzle there. But I have a very strong feeling that Aunt Pat or my father, probably Aunt Pat, being the younger, was probably set up out there in the extension that was built. So anyway, we have a few pictures of Papa. Here's one of him with a nice fish he caught. He loved fishing. My dad, and he used to go hunting and fishing all the time. And when he passed, my father really never went hunting or fishing again, as far as I know. I didn't really enjoy either one. I don't like killing things. I like eating things, but I just don't like having to kill it to eat it. But so it was never a passion of mine. But Dad pretty much hung it up after Papa passed. So here's a picture of Papa's sisters from left to right. It's B, Kate, Pauline, Chloe, and Hazel. So these are his sisters. And here's a picture of him with 3 of his brothers. It's John D, his Papa, Guy, who is an amazing person himself, and Rex. Now Guy, at the age of 17, lied about it, joined the Marines, and went and fought in the Asian theater in World War II, and he was a hero. He fought through Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Now this is stories according to my dad. I don't have Guy's service record, but he fought through these major battles and survived. So Guy's an amazing man himself. Now the one person you don't see pictured here is Lamar. Oscar Lamar Brooks is one of Papa's other brothers. Now Lamar was actually killed in a car wreck. Lamar was an amazing trumpet player, and he played in Dean Hudson's orchestra. Now, it's probably not a name you freely recognize, but here's a little bit of their music here in the background while I talk about Lamar a little bit. Now, he played trumpet with his band, and his band toured all over playing dance music and, this type of club entertainment. And he played with them for years, and they had Lamar quit, basically, and Dean had asked him to come back for one final show. They were playing, it was a military appreciation show in Gainesville, Florida. So he was down there, he played the show, and then that night was in a car being driven by one of the other trumpet players. Now, the guy ran a stop sign and was broadsided, and the car was knocked into a pedestrian and then into a building. This was March 22nd, 1947. Now, at this point, Papa was, 32 years old, so they were all, they were adults. But Papa had told me, I had seen a commercial of a car or something. That's a nice car. And Papa had said, oh, I don't like convertibles. My brother Lamar was killed in one. He was in a car wreck, and it rolled over and crushed his chest. So this car, apparently, he was broadsided and ran over a pedestrian, went into a building, and I guess it had flipped, but it killed him. And Papa talked about how he had to drive down and pick up the body and bring it back and stuff like that. So we don't know much about Lamar other than we have his music and the Harry Dean Orchestra. Now, we don't have any pictures of him, but we have a few pictures of the orchestra. Maybe he's one of these guys here, I don't know. But, for my descendants, if you're interested in more of the music, you can go and YouTube Harry Dean Orchestra, and they've got whole albums out there on YouTube. So please feel free to enjoy some of that and maybe think about your great-great-uncle Lamar. Here's another picture of the brothers and sisters. It's B, Rex, Kate, Papa, Chloe, Guy, Pauline, Hazel, and John D. Now, I actually remember John D. He was a big man by the time I was old enough to remember him. I'm sure I met many of the other sisters and brothers. I don't remember them, but for some reason I remember John D. because I remember his laugh. But, he made enough to support his family, send both of his children to college. My father went to the University of Alabama, where he, I believe, majored in communications, but was in ROTC, Air Force ROTC. And when he graduated, he went straight to flight school and became an Air Force pilot. So he is definitely advanced the stature of our family through his actions, but we'll get to him another time. Now, my Aunt Pat went to Auburn. I believe she had some kind of a music degree. I'm sure my cousin Keisha will chime in. Which, by the way, talking about Keisha, I'm sure Doc Oscar would be very proud of her. Now, he was a country, rural, uneducated veterinarian. Keisha's a full-fledged vet from the University of Auburn, and she's down in Lakeland, Florida now, and does some great things. Matter of fact, Victoria's kitten, Petunia, we rescued from Keisha, and the kitten had been delivered in a box on her doorstep, barely alive. Both corneas ruptured in her eyes, and nursed her back to health, restored her sight, and now she's a feisty little bugger, and she's doing really well. So anyway, Doc would be very proud of Keisha, as we all are, even though she did go to Auburn. So anyway, as I was mentioning, Papa, did enough to make sure his family was taken care of, and then took care of all the poor relations, the poor folks, gave stuff away to them in order to help his community. He was a much beloved man in the community, as will be attested, because there are just random people who remember his store and things about it. I've got an article I'm going to read part of by a woman named Jackie Garvin, who remembers going to Papa's store as a child with her grandfather. And she wrote this on her blog, and I'm going to read this to you. I'm trying to maintain my composure, because it does bring back so many nostalgic memories. All right, here we go. Mr. Lovell Brooks' store was just down the street from where my grandparents lived in the Cotton Mill Village in Geneva, Alabama. It was an old-timey store where my grandparents, Peyton and Virginia Phillips, traded, as Granddaddy called it, for no telling how many years. Mr. Brooks was there before the retail grocery stores came to town. He beat the Piggly Wiggly and the IGA. And my grandparents were loyal to Mr. Brooks and his store, whose fate is unclear to me. Now, I did try to contact her to let her know that I had read this article and was going to give her information if she wanted it, but she hasn't answered me back. It's been several weeks, so I'm not sure she will. But if she does, I'll give her the information. My hunch is that the retail chains probably forced the closing of his store, either single-handedly or in conjunction with his health and advancing age. And that may be true. I think it was probably the advancing age and all that did it, because he had done fine. A favorite story of mine involving Granddaddy also includes Mr. Brooks. After we arrived home from trading with Mr. Brooks, something prompted Dan. Responding to the look of sheer puzzlement on his face, Granddaddy asked what was wrong. He pondered and finally said, "I just made a mistake in counting out my change. I come away with $1.65 more than I should have." Each of you can silently decide how you might handle this moral dilemma, but Granddaddy handled it the only way his character would allow. He promptly got back in his car, drove to Mr. Brooks' store, and returned the $1.65. That's the stock from which I made. She also provides this picture in her blog, which she believes is, the woman on the right is one of the relations. I don't know for sure, but that little story prompts me to remember something I did as a child. Now, we would go up to the store. It was always a treat to get to go to the store, Papa's store. He was working, of course, so we get to pop in, whatever, and he'd give us free Cokes. But one day, and I might have been 5 or 6 years old, we were in there, and I took a small thing of shoelaces. I didn't need them. I didn't really know why I took them. I just took them. And, later on, I guess I showed it to my parents or whatever, and I was ripped for having stolen from my grandfather, and was made to take these shoelaces back to the store and confess to my grandfather that I had stolen from him. And for somebody of that age who revered his grandfather as much as I did, it was a soul-crushing moment. It taught me a lesson that I have never forgotten, obviously. But it was soul-crushing that I had to admit to somebody whose regard I hold so highly that I had stolen from him. So, you know, okay, we move on. But I can remember even what the shoelaces looked like in my hand. That's how clearly this memory is engraved in my memory. So we all have good and bad memories about the store. 99.999% of them are just amazing. It's just the one. So whatever, we move on. But like I said, we're not going to get too much into the personal side of this, so let's continue reading. The store was located on the part of the main highway that was pretty close to town, the kind of downtown common to small towns where you park at a right angle in front of the stores. It was a small store with parking only for a few cars in front. My recollection of a wooden facade and a single gas pump might not be entirely accurate. I don't remember there being a gas pump there. But that's how I remember it, nonetheless. As you enter the front door, you ran smack dab into the checkout counter. Register. Here's a picture of Papa at the cash register here. Behind the cash register were shelves that contained items such as stick candy. Below was a candy jar that Granny and Granddaddy got for me from Mr. Brooks. Different flavors of stick candy, such as peppermint, and perhaps orange and lemon were in the jar. I mostly remember the peppermint. The shelves behind the cash register held other things too, maybe tobacco products, maybe goodie powders and black plastic combs. I only need to remember the stick candy. To the right was a freezer chest that contained ice cream bars and popsicles. I remember that too. As you walked in, it was to the right. The Coke machine was to the left. If there was a Coca-Cola machine, I can't picture it in my mind, but it probably would have been here too, and it was. And it would have held those little 6.5 ounce bottles. Now that's funny. I seem to remember them being bigger than that, but I remember riding in the back of Papa's truck with my cousins back when that was okay to have a pass on the kids in the back of a truck drinking Cokes. But this harkens back to memories of my great-grandmother Bowles, my grandmommy's mother, who loved her little Coca-Colas. She loved those little Coca-Colas. It's funny, the things you remember. There were a few aisles throughout the store where various food items were shelved. The very back of the store contained the meat counter. And it's funny, in the back, okay, so it was in the back and the left, you have a meat counter, and then you have a cooler, a meat freezer, which was pretty cold, I will tell you, as I know personally, because it was a game of mine to allow Papa to lock me in there to see how long I could stand the cold. On those hot Alabama days, it felt really good in there, I'm going to tell you right now. So she goes on to say, you know, they were there to get some pies that apparently Papa sold out of his frozen area of the store. But, you know, it's just amazing that the kind of impact that these places have on people that they remember that impact their lives and they bring away with them. And so Papa ran the store as long as he could. Now, we, of course, were traveling all over the world, being, you know, in a military family. But, you know, Papa did his thing and took care of his family and his community until he passed away in October of 1986 at the age of 71. Now, I remember the day my sister showed up at the trailer I was living out in the woods. You know, by this time I was 21 years old. But from the moment that she told me of his passing, it changed my life profoundly, and I will have a video about when it becomes my turn to relate my story. Now, Grandmommy was a seamstress at Van Heusen forever and ever. And then after she retired from there, she went on to make dolls and made, you know, quite a nice little hobby slash business out of it, making these dolls. And I think we've got an article about that here as well. But she passed away on September 9th in 1996. So she was able to at least see me graduate from college and, you know, get married, start my life, and things like that. So she was able to, you know, see me through my bad years and into my good, and so I'm grateful for that. But I, you know, miss them both terribly, as you would expect. So yeah, there you go. That's their story in a nutshell, and you know, of course, there's so much more to it. But how much can you pass along in a video? And again, you'll get to know them more as we weave the rest of the story, because as it becomes closer to my turn, things become, like I said, more personal and more interwoven with first-hand accounts. So, you know, hopefully my descendants, you'll find this information valuable. Sorry about my voice. I've done the best I could, so there you go. All right, guys. Thanks for coming, and thanks for allowing me to take a week off to recuperate, and hopefully we'll get back on track with these videos. All right? Y'all have a good one.